Hello and welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. This is the Notebook Dump Edition, and congratulations for making it through yet another week. We're almost into the summer. That must feel pretty good, unless you're in New York and then everything looks orange all the time, at least for a couple more days. My name is Phil Harvey. I'm an editor here at Light Reading. I'm joined by Nicole Ferraro in said New York, in the orange capital of the world, Jeff Baumgartner in Colorado, and Kelsey Zeiser, who was in Ottawa but did not start a forest fire. But now she's back in the Carolinas, probably North Carolina today, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay. I always get that wrong. This time I got it right. That's very unusual. Some housekeeping announcements. The first thing is that we're going to move the Notebook Dump to an every other week thing during the summer months, because we've got people coming and going on vacation, and there's a little bit of travel mixed in here or there. And then, of course, the news is slowing down just a tad. So we don't have quite as much to react to. We do have a lot for you to see and read and listen to and all that stuff on lightreading.com. But this particular podcast will go every other week until probably August, September timeframe. We'll see how it goes. But thanks for keeping us going and continuing to listen and watch wherever you may be listening and watching. Let's go around the horn and see what the heck is going on out there. First, we'll start with Nicole before she runs out of oxygen and and she turns orange.
I mean, you really set me up here because you said New York is the orange capital of the world and Trump was born in Queens. Like, I'm trying not to make that joke, but I did. Whatever.
That's right. He's ahead of the game.
It's right. That we were always the orange capital of the world because of that. All right. Anyway, whatever. Pretend I didn't say that. But anyway, apart from being immersed in all things orange, this week I have been thinking about the Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP, as I often am.
Yes.
I've mentioned here before that there's been a lot of discussion this year about the fate of the Affordable Connectivity Program because it is projected to run out of funding next year. And I think we're getting a little bit more color on that situation and where it's headed. But as always, let me just quickly level set and tell you that the Affordable Connectivity Program is a monthly broadband subsidy for low-income households, currently subsidizing over 18 million households in the U.S. with $30 a month toward broadband service, up to $75 if you're a household on tribal land, as well as a one-time $100 device subsidy. As I said, it's projected to run out of funding sometime next year. How fast that happens depends in part on the success of an ongoing grant program that the FCC is running to help local governments and nonprofits get more households enrolled, because there's some estimates that show that roughly 40 million households in the U.S. are actually eligible for this program. And so 18 million is obviously a fraction of that. There's been discussions all year about how it's unclear if this program will have the support to get renewed with additional funding. It was passed in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was passed in 2021 with bipartisan support. But we have a different Congress now. Republicans are in control of the House. There's just a bit of a different vibe in Congress. If you watch those guys, you know what I'm talking about. So it's been a little unclear on if that program will have support. People in the industry have sort of been like, well, it passed with bipartisan support, so we're confident it's going to do the same thing. Those feelings are sort of getting a little bit more, less sort of diplomatic.
Strained.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly because a letter was recently released by House and Senate oversight leaders, Ted Cruz, Kathy McMorris Rogers, to the FCC Office of Inspector General, asking a lot of questions about the program and basically complaining that the eligibility requirements are too broad and that there's too much potential for waste, fraud, and abuse. And earlier this week, former FCC commissioner, a conservative Republican, as he was self-described, Michael O'Reilly, spoke on a panel about the ACP and said while he supports the program, based on his conversations with Republicans on the Hill, basically it's going to need a lot of modifications in terms of eligibility requirements and waste and fraud and such if it's going to get funded again. So I think that we are now in the spot where it's becoming clearer that it's really unclear if it's going to have the support, and if it will, it's going to require a lot of changes. So I don't think we're anywhere near seeing a bill that will refund this program. It'll probably come down to the wire sometime next year, and it's going to need a lot more pushing from the ISPs that want this money, from the constituents that are benefiting from it. And so we'll see what happens, but it's definitely a rough spot for the ACP to be in right now.
Yeah, I thought you and your interview with Gigi Stone on The Divide was interesting, and you guys talked a little bit about that as well, and she seemed kind of concerned about it running out. And I thought it was interesting when you all were talking about how people balance just their budget. Like, do they, do you prioritize groceries or broadband?
Right.
What do you do? It puts a lot of people in a really tight spot. So,
yeah. And I've heard that example cited many times. Every time I hear people talk about the ACP, people who help people enroll in the program, they talk about that. Earlier this week on one of these panels, I wrote about this in a story this week that somebody mentioned that exact thing, that they helped somebody enroll and that person was deciding whether to keep broadband or get groceries. So, it is that kind of a thing. And one of the sticking points for the Republicans appears to be, well, were these people, were they not enrolled in any broadband service? That's who, at least this letter from Ted Cruz and Kathy McMorris Rogers and so on, they are indicating that they want this program to be prioritized for people who are not connected to broadband, not people who are connected and are now using it to subsidize that connection. But that, who is to decide what any different individual, right? Well, exactly. So that's what it.
Yeah. That's where really I get kind of. Yeah. Wrapped up in this, is that it's just the goal is to connect more people.
Exactly.
Up. So, yeah. and I would think Republicans would be into that because, they spend especially Mr. Cruz spends an inordinate amount of time on social platforms and not as much time doing his job as he actually should. He hasn't done a damn thing for this state. So it's interesting that they It's interesting
but that wasn't even a joke.
That's a priority. No, that's just even a fact. But it's a
that's
priority
as close as I could get
for
to
them to root out waste and corruption. Given his peer group at the Texas State House, I'm really shocked that that's on the agenda. But the whole point, waste included, is to get more and more people connected. That benefits everybody. And like you said, it certainly benefits the broadband providers, who are at a point now where their only way toward growth is to simply steal subscribers from other broadband providers. Regulation has failed. There isn't a healthy competitive market. So the only way for these guys to grow or show growth to their shareholders is to steal customers. And the only way to come up with new customers is to connect the unconnected. So yeah, they're really, there's a lot of dominoes falling right now if this thing goes away.
Well, I think it's interesting. I don't know how much granularity they provide, Nicole, when you're talking about, who's using ACP to get connected at all versus subsidizing their existing service and maybe upgrading to a different speed. And I thought that was interesting because it comes up a lot particularly on the Cable One calls. The question always comes up about ACP, and they have indicated that a lot of the transactions involving ACP are those kind of customers that are using it to get a higher level of speed. And it also came out in like the Open Vault studies on broadband consumption. It's like, wow, why are the ACP? They were able to kind of pinpoint some of that, and the amount of data used by that particular group was pretty high. But again, it was because they're using those funds to get more speed. Yeah.
Right. So if you're looking at this from a cynical perspective, the perspective that I would say the Republicans are taking on this matter, you would say, well, they don't need that speed, or if they can just get that speed themselves. But how do you know that those people need that speed in order to do their job from home, their whatever it is, and they can't afford it without this subsidy, and they wouldn't have it without this subsidy. They would be, relegated to some speed tier that doesn't work for their family. So I don't know if we can go around to, each individual household and put them to the test and find out if they're really worthy of the benefit. But it's certainly going to be a dramatic problem to kick 18 million and counting households off of a program, just as we're spending $40 billion to build networks everywhere.
That's where I think this will come to a head, is when you have to kick people off, and then it starts showing up in the numbers. And the broadband providers.
Yeah, complicates
when
the whole discussion.
When the CEOs, are getting grilled by analysts about, whether their plans are working because the numbers are so terrible and so on and so forth, then that'll roll downhill, and all the grandstanding will suddenly cease for a moment, and people might actually get something done.
Yeah, and just to answer Jeff's question about there was no granularity, the FCC Office of Inspector General basically responded to the letter with, we don't have answers for most of these questions, but they're doing, an oversight, they're looking into various things. So we will see.
Cool. Kelsey, let's move on to you. You were up in Ottawa this week visiting Ciena. What'd you see and what'd you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, for one, the wildfires were a little crazy.
Pretty scary stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just like this orange tint over everything. And definitely it smelled pretty smoky there. But aside from that, it was a good event. So Ciena was hosting their Vectors event, which they do every couple of years. The last one I went to was in 2017, and, the pandemic kind of derailed all the in-person events, but it's for media analysts and their customers, and it's hosted at their Ottawa lab. And they talked a lot about the WaveLogic 6 modem, which is their 1.6 terabit service, which kind of leapfrogged what a lot of the optical industry is doing. A lot of their competitors are focused on 1.2, but they went ahead to 1.6, which is going to be, I think, generally available next year. So got to see some of the equipment in person, and also they talked a lot about sustainability and energy efficiency. For example, within the WaveLogic 6 modem, they use a 3 nanometer chip instead of, I think a lot of competitors are using 5 nanometers, and it's more energy efficient. And then they were talking also about so they're entering the metro routing market, and so they have their Wave Router product, which they the way they designed it allows for customers to I guess have more equipment in a smaller space instead of having to leave racks open. The thermal cooling is better, and then they also have the option to add liquid cooling in the future. And I was like, is this a dumb question? Like, what is in liquid cooling? And they said it's 25% propylene glycol, which I think is like a food additive, and then 75% water. So for anyone wondering what kind of liquid.
You want to make your own at home.
It's going to make some lunch. Based on
yeah. So it's not toxic.
On that.
Yeah.
The broth. Yeah.
The rack stacking thing is actually a real deal, though, in data centers. It's like they because these things run at such capacities, and the equipment, especially older equipment, gets to such a temperature that they found the only way to manage the problem, no matter how cool they kept the surrounding air, was to simply just remove every other something out of every other slot and allow more airflow through the rack itself. And of course, that completely blows any efficiency that you have in the data center. So it's good to hear that they're addressing that, because one problem leads to another. The more bandwidth, the more miniaturization of components, the more likely you're going to have this concept of thermal runaway or sort of equipment just simply overheating because it's moving too many bits around on a circuit board.
Yeah, they said they were talking to a customer that, like, in a typical chassis, if you're going in and like removing a component from the back, they had to use oven mitts. And then this woman was keeping like a liter of water with her because she would get so hot. She would go through all the water while she was doing it. And it's hard to access from the back. So the liquid cooling's kind of interesting. Like, they're like, okay, go ahead, you can touch it. And I'm like, all right, I'm trusting you. But it was fine. It was totally cool. I didn't need any oven mitts. And
didn't leave any scars on your hands.
Could be a lawsuit in the making here. Yeah.
Well,
it wasn't even the wildfires that got me.
Well, I was going to say, this is a very, very like fire hazardy trip. So
a lot of heat.
I'm very surprised this ended with you at home and not in the emergency room.
Very glad of
totally
that.
Fine.
So if you're watching on the site, so in the next few days, as you're hearing this, Kelsey will have some podcasts that she recorded from Ottawa. So we'll have kind of continuing coverage of Ciena, throughout. They are the market leader in optical networking, and so obviously what they say dictates a lot of what direction the market is going. Also, if you're on the site this week, check out Ian's story on their earnings and the sort of vexing issue they're finding with the backlog that they have, where customers have put in equipment orders and they're sort of waiting on either components or they're waiting on customers to decide to solidify deployment dates and stuff like that. In my opinion, some of these fall under good problems to have because it's like a pile up of orders means that there's orders, but there is some, Ian gets into all the issues there about, kind of what that means in real life and in real time when a company's trying to sort of struggling to keep up, even when it's, ahead of the market in a lot of ways. Jeff, what the heck did you do this week?
Well, I mean, like you said at the beginning, we are kind of in this slow phase of the year, but there was some big news out of the cable tech world that was hiding out in the open, I guess, and that was that CableLabs has booted up its DOCSIS 4 modem certification program. They just kind of dropped this thing on their website. So, but what it said is that vendors can start to submit their devices starting June 26th, so just a few weeks away. And it's a pretty big deal because it signals the progress that's being made with modem products that support a spec that will pave the way for symmetrical gigabit broadband on HFC networks with lower latency and enhanced security. DAA is a requirement, so the hope is that DOCSIS 4.0 is also going to bump up the reliability of the network. But the big question, I think now is like, who's going to be ready to go by later this month? And I put questions out to all the vendors about their plans. And at this very moment, nothing has been confirmed by any of them. But
they all lost your number, huh?
Yeah. Who? What? Yeah. So we'll see, though. I mean, I think they're all like double checking. What should we tell him? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Right. But let's all get together and get our story straight.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And is CableLabs okay with this? I mean, I think that there's a lot of that conversation going on. But I was talking to some people today, and the thought is that the most likely candidates are, at least for the first initial round, might involve the suppliers that are involved in this Broadcom joint development agreement that you had to sign to get access to the chipsets kind of in the early stages here. So if you look at that group, it could be Hytron, it could be Vantiva, which split out of Technicolor a little while back. It could be Hytron. UB Interactive is another supplier there, maybe Sercom. So I'm going to do my best to stay on top of that. I'm actually speaking to CableLabs soon to get a little more color on the program, so I'll have more to share one way or the other. But in the meantime, we do know a couple things. CableLabs is prepared to test products against both options for 4.0, so that's full duplex DOCSIS that Comcast is doing, the extended spectrum DOCSIS option, which most everybody else is focused on. So the suppliers can either test against one or the other or both, and the fees for that, it's like $209,000. So, pocket change for some, maybe some of the smaller suppliers, and that's a pretty big chunk of change. So what they're trying to do to kind of help with that, because the fees are a little bit higher with 4.0, they have this success-based testing approach that permits the devices to be updated as often as possible to get 4.0 certification without absorbing more of those fees. I think in the past they've had to resubmit, and it can get kind of expensive. And then there's this other 2-for-1 test results program, which sounds like something you get at like Wendy's or something, but it will allow the vendor to
test.
Yeah, you get 2 sides of fries. So they do this thing where they can verify the modem on 3.1 systems, and then later on, as 4.0 technology continues to mature, you can test that against network stuff that's based on 4.0. So they're trying to make it a little bit easier for the suppliers to test and retest without getting buried in all these fees. But I think when you boil it down, I mean, it's pretty good news, I guess, for the cable guys, because it means that we might have certified 4.0 modems by, say, late 2023 at the very earliest, but maybe more likely next year. And that's all kind of coming together as the operators continue to seed the network for 4.0 with DAA, which is a prerequisite for 4.0. So actually a little bit of stuff happening in cable all of a sudden. So that was good to see.
Yeah, we're making, I guess, progressive steps forward to being able to upgrade existing cable networks to gigabit speeds. And that's hugely important because it puts off the immediate need for fiber in the short term, and also upgrades a ton of people because they're, I don't know how many million of people are connected by DOCSIS 4.0 eligible networks, or soon to be connected by those networks. But yeah, it's a pretty big deal for broadband, especially in the US.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, and Jeff and I both, so I'll end on this. I know we're running a bit long, but Jeff and I both listened to the Apple Vision Pro announcement at the Worldwide Developers Conference. Is that Monday? It seems
Monday.
Like 6-7 years ago. But yeah, it was Monday.
In technology years, it was a decade ago.
Yeah. And I I've got some kind of reactions to the whole thing, and kind of reactions to the reactions of everybody online. But Jeff, we should talk about this because, just kind of going out of order for what my thoughts are. The one thing I noticed about Vision Pro was that connectivity was not really a feature. So I think the fact that Apple didn't even mention it means that they don't expect that either they haven't thought it through yet, or they don't expect that people are game to pay for any kind of difference in connectivity. So they're probably just going to put in Wi-Fi, but they might put in 5G, but who cares? Nobody's going to pay an upcharge anyway.
It was odd. I thought that there was really nothing said or shared yet. And maybe, like you said, they're not ready to talk about the specs for the connectivity. You and I had talked about, you had mentioned, well, maybe they'll build it into that device that
the
they
little
hang
battery
off
brick.
Battery. Yeah. Maybe they put it in there. I was having a couple discussions about with a couple folks who are kind of in that segment, or are going to get access to some of these, the Vision Pro to run tests on, and their thinking was, and not confirmed or anything, but yeah, it would be probably initially Wi-Fi focus, and there was some thought of maybe would Apple do a Wi-Fi 6E only type of approach, where it's only using the 6 gigahertz spectrum, where there's a lot of capacity there to do what they need to do, or would they do multiband with like Wi-Fi 7? I don't think they haven't announced anything. The only thing I saw was in some of the small print when they were talking about some of the tests they conducted. It was on Wi-Fi connected to a network, but that's the only place anything or the only area where anything actually showed up in any of the material.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. There was no mention of it being the cellular thing. And it also kind of makes sense because the use cases that they showed were people, a woman on an airplane, a man at a desk at work, and then, a couple of different people at apartments or in their bedrooms or in their living rooms, sort of enjoying entertainment. So this isn't a device, because I think this was also kind of miscommunicated by a few analysts out there. This is not a device that people are going to wear anywhere. It's not Google Glass. They're not leaving their house with this thing on. It doesn't seem to be that kind of device. And Apple was pretty careful not to show that off. And so I think that takes down the expectation that we're going to have any kind of cellular connectivity, at least at first. I do think they've left the door open, because one of my other observations about what was interesting in the whole thing was that what they've actually done, if you just put the device aside for a second, is they've created a new user interface for our computers and other devices. Spatial computing does kind of give you this this ability to use a Vision Pro type of device to tether to a laptop, but basically to create screens at eye level as big as you like and as many as you like. I'm sure there's limitations on it, but I can see people in creative fields where they're designing, where they're editing, where they're even doing high intensity, photo work on high res photos, or video editing, or even sound editing, where they can have kind of a tactile feel for the timeline and stuff like that. I can see a new UI that uses the space around you to be incredibly valuable and incredibly useful and super efficient, especially if you can keep those multiple windows open. And that has a knock-on effect to the Mac, because one of the other things Apple is high on right now is the fact that they have finally weaned themselves off of Intel chips. So they've got high performing chips in all of their new laptops and all of their, new devices, and having this new user interface that's essentially going to drive computing cycles, is very good for them, because it keeps you needing more horsepower for your computer. And the more horsepower you need, the better these devices perform, the more aggressive you can get with opening windows and, having things playing on one side. Like, you could literally have, 2 or 3 playoff games going on while you have your conference call over here. I'm not saying I'm going to do this.
That's a Nicole use case for sure.
I was just thinking things that Nicole and I will never.
During the NFL playoffs, there's probably no way for me to say that I'm going to do that. But
Nicole would be watching like Senate hearings on one side,
That's
Senate
true,
hearings
yeah.
and Tony
Broadway.
performances. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She could have.
It's my personality.
Could have some Broadway stuff going on. Senate hearing in one corner, and then maybe the security camera from her building.
Perfect summer vacation.
He sees all. Yes.
But anyway, I thought the whole idea of Apple just sort of, the device is one thing, and whether people are going to like Vision Pro or not, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that sort of thing. But one quick thing about the last sort of observation I have is the price. Everybody sort of balked at the price, but it was a developer conference. So I feel like if the price is a problem, then it wasn't for you, because Apple announces all kinds of things at these developer conferences. I mean, they sell a Mac Pro. It's a tower computer that costs somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000, and nobody batted an eye about that. So I think and the reason why is because that computer is not for you. That's for people who make Marvel movies. that's the only person. The use case for this is very slim, and I think that we have to get used to the fact that Apple is going to be telling developers things that are targeted to very specific high-end markets that really don't affect the rest of us. But the UI thing, I think that could affect the rest of us eventually when this stuff kind of gets proliferates and gets out there a bit. I think there's a lot of directions we could go with a new user interface to standard computing, and that would be an easier way to layer in more high-end computing like actual, augmented reality and virtual reality, in addition to, the standard stuff that we would do on a laptop. So anyway, those are sort of the things I took away from it. But yeah, for the telcos, sorry, it doesn't look like you're participating in this part of the economy yet again. It's until this stuff becomes, it's untethered now, but it's not mobile. And so I don't.
And maybe when it becomes more mainstream, or a little more mainstream.
Yeah, and I do expect that private 5G will be a player here in that space, because there is, like I said, there's some industrial uses, there's some design things. I'm sure they're going to make specialty headsets for different industries and stuff like that. So there is a role for telcos to play on kind of the enterprise connectivity side. So I don't mean to be completely dismissive. I think that'll come to fruition. And then, like we saw this week, Apple just recently bought an AR headset maker that had some applications for the U.S. military. So there's clearly an intent to either tune Vision Pro to wildly different use cases, or to take the technology developed for Vision Pro and have it trickling into more specialized hardware and stuff like that. But either way you go, there is an opening for this to maybe excite interest in private 5G or something like that in the enterprise.
Yeah. Also wonder if eventually there might be different tiers of the product, just like they've kind of done with everything else, like having, when the iPod was big, you had the Shuffle and the Nano and all kinds of different price points and capabilities. So maybe they'll have like a monocle one. It's like cheaper.
If your life wasn't hard enough, now you can wear a monocle and get picked on constantly. That's awesome.
That is so funny.
Yeah. I can totally see that showing up too.
That's one thing you just don't see.
With their big old mustaches and vaping.
Maybe some steampunk goggles instead, like a smaller version. But yeah, it's gonna. I think there is going to be. Let's get to our flash poll. I mean, would you buy a device of this sort if Apple's Vision Pro or Apple's next variant of Vision Pro had dropped to $1,000 or below?
As the person in the group with an Oculus, I feel I have to speak up. I only have this device because the pandemic came along, and my brother and I, we used to have a fun habit of meeting up every couple of months and watching an obscure movie. And so we decided during the pandemic to get Oculus headsets and do that. So we were able to do that, but it cost me I think it was like $300 at the time. Yeah. And that was like pushing it. That was only because I was losing my mind, and my brother kept asking me to do it. But so no, I $1,000,
still too much.
$3,000, no. And I'm pretty sure the price point on this starts at $34.99. So I think that is the starting price. I'm not sure if there's tiers that are going to be lower.
I think it'll do the iPhone thing. I think it'll have the initial price, which will be too high for most consumers in most places for most uses, but then eventually they'll have stacks of devices. They'll have one that's kind of this is for sort of more of the mass market, and then they'll probably come out with a $6,000 or $7,000 version that's a little more high end for things, or they'll specialize and go into different verticals, because like I said, there might be they might actually sense that there's a bigger need for specific high-end verticals and maybe they don't really care as much about the consumer market on this. I totally agree. I don't know if I might buy one for $1,000 if it truly unlocked the computer in the way that they demonstrated, because I'm not really I'm not going to play games on it or do whatever, but I would think that price is still a bit too much for most people.
Yeah. Also, just for what I think I would use it in a similar way to Nicole. Like I was reading about the, different FaceTime how it would kind of change FaceTime and watching movies together, but that's contingent on the other person wanting to buy it as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have a hard enough time just with my mom on FaceTime getting her to turn the camera. Properly. Sorry, Mom. Just gonna throw you under the bus there.
Now she's gonna FaceTime you.
I'd be
like, Mom, turn it around.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I think it would have to go a little further below $1,000 for me to give it any serious consideration. I mean, I've had a couple of VR products, not an Oculus, but like whatever that one that you connect to the PlayStation, and that was like more for games and stuff. And I thought it was an interesting experience, but there was kind of a novelty to it, and it kind of wore off. And I was like, I don't really use it enough. So I think that would be my fear. But it sounds like they do the way they're putting a lot of different use cases. Maybe the usability is a little bit improved or expanded, to consider it. But I think for me, I didn't have to get into that $700 range to even be considered.
Yeah, the one use case I saw that was a little far-fetched in my opinion was although it seemed cool, but the woman who put it on the airplane and was like, suddenly surrounded and, kind of blocked out the world or whatever. I love the idea of completely losing yourself in a movie while you're on an airplane, but to do that, you'd have to pack the damn thing and carry it on the airplane and then fret about breaking it the whole time and everything else. And it's just like, yeah, exactly.
And you'd have to pre-download anything you wanted to watch because Wi-Fi on airplanes is always touch and go. And can you imagine being in the middle seat and like, what if you're like interacting with it and you're just slapping everybody next to you and causing a ruckus?
I don't think
that would be me. I'd be like, "Whoa, sorry."
I don't think you'd be doing too many hand motions in that scenario. But yeah, the whole idea of like what I really wanted to see was the picture of her getting through TSA and up to the gate and that sort of thing. It's like that's the reality I want to skip over.
Only the only thing that would work, Kelsey, is if it was like a Tyrannosaurus Rex simulator. They have little short arms anyway, so you could maybe do that. But yeah, you couldn't. Yeah.
Right.
Mine looked kind of like a bunny.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you have a Tyrannosaurus Rex game and you are a developer and boy, this market's getting smaller all the time. I'm not really sure where that goes. I tell you what, for now, since we don't know where the market is going, why don't we wrap up this edition of the Notebook Dump? This will close out the week ending Friday, June the 9th, 2023. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. Unless it's orange outside.